was 33 years old when I learned how quickly trust can evaporate. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday morning, the kind that feels safely predictable. I was drinking reheated coffee, scrolling my phone, thinking about work deadlines and weekend groceries. Then I opened my banking app. My savings account, the one I never touched, showed a balance of $0. I stared at the screen, convinced it was a loading error. I refreshed. Same number. I logged out and back in. Still zero. That account had held $125,000, 9 years of careful saving, overtime shifts, skipped vacations, and quiet discipline. My hands started shaking before my mind caught up. I called the bank expecting reassurance. Instead, I got confirmation. The funds had been transferred out the previous afternoon. The transfer was approved by an authorized user on the account. When the representative said my father's name, my chest went hollow. I remember asking her to repeat it, as if hearing it twice would somehow make it less real. She explained the policy in a calm, professional voice. Joint access meant full permission. No alerts were required. No confirmation from me was necessary. I sat there in silence after the call ended, phone still pressed to my ear. A strange clarity settled in. I thought about every lecture I had ever heard about family loyalty, about sacrifice, about trust. I thought about how often I had been told not to worry because family would never hurt me. In that moment, all of those words felt heavy and misleading. If you want the full truth, hit like so this story reaches more people who might be living in that same false sense of safety. Because what happened next didn't start with shouting or tears. It started with a decision I never thought I would have to make. I didn't call my father right away. That might sound strange, but I needed a moment to understand what I was feeling before I let his voice shape it. Shock was already there, sharp and cold. Beneath it was something heavier, a slow realization that this hadn't come out of nowhere. I sat at my kitchen table and stared at the wall while memories lined up in my head, neat and unforgiving. Growing up, my dad was respected. He was the man people trusted, the one relatives asked for advice, the one who spoke with authority at family gatherings. He always said family money was family business. At the time, it sounded comforting. Looking back, it sounds like a warning I ignored. When I opened my first savings account in my early 20s, he insisted on being added, just in case. He said emergencies didn't announce themselves. I agreed because saying no felt like an accusation. And in our family, questioning intentions was treated like betrayal. Over the years, I became the stable one, the reliable one. I worked full-time, picked up freelance jobs, said no to expensive trips. Every deposit into that account felt like a promise to my future self. Meanwhile, my younger brother bounced between plans, new business ideas, new investments, new reasons things hadn't worked out yet. My parents worried out loud. I listened quietly. I replayed the last family dinner in my head. My dad had joked about how money came and went, how people worried too much about numbers. I remembered how my mom nodded along. None of it had seemed alarming at the time. Now it felt rehearsed. When I finally called my father, he answered like nothing was wrong. I asked him directly, "Did you move my savings?" There was a pause just long enough to feel intentional. Then he sighed and said yes. He told me not to be dramatic. He said the money was being used properly, that I would thank him later. He spoke as if he were rearranging furniture, not erasing years of my life. That was the moment anger replaced shock. Not loud anger, focused anger. The kind that sharpens your thoughts instead of blurring them. I realized he didn't think he had done anything wrong, and that terrified me more than the missing money. Comment INSAAF if you believe she deserved justice, because what came next forced me to choose between keeping the peace and protecting myself. I asked him where the money was. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he started explaining why it was necessary. He said my brother was in trouble, that an investment had gone bad, that deadlines were closing in. He said a family doesn't let one member fall when another can help. I reminded him it was my savings, not a shared emergency fund. He corrected me. He said, "It's all family money in the end." The casual certainty in his voice made my stomach turn. I told him I needed the money back, all of it. He laughed, not cruelly but dismissively, the way someone laughs when they think you're being naive. He said I had time, that I was young, that I earned well and could rebuild. He said my brother needed it more right now, as if need erased ownership, as if effort was interchangeable. After the call ended, I sat very still. I noticed small details, the hum of the refrigerator, the dust on the windowsill, the way my hands felt oddly cold. It struck me that my father didn't see me as a person with boundaries. He saw me as a resource, reliable, quiet, available. I opened my laptop and pulled up my records. Spreadsheets, bank statements, years of careful tracking. Seeing the numbers laid out was grounding. It reminded me this wasn't emotional confusion. This was factual loss. I called the bank again, this time asking about dispute procedures. The representative explained the rules patiently. Because my father had joint access, recovery would be complicated. But when I asked about authorization methods, her tone shifted. She mentioned electronic confirmations, signatures, logs. That night, I barely slept. My phone buzzed with messages from my mother, telling me not to stress, telling me everything would work out if I trusted them. Each message felt like pressure wrapped in concern. Around 3 in the morning, I made a decision that scared me more than losing the money. I decided to find out exactly how that transfer had been approved. The next day, I contacted a friend who worked in digital security. I didn't tell her the full story, just that I needed help understanding a transaction record. She agreed to look. While I waited, my father called again. His tone was firmer this time. He warned me not to involve outsiders. He said family matters should stay inside the family. That warning told me everything I needed to know. Type yes if you want to see all targets hit at once, because the truth I uncovered next changed the balance of power completely. My friend called me that evening. Her voice was careful, professional in a way that made my chest tighten before she even finished her first sentence. She told me the transfer hadn't been approved from any device associated with my account history. The electronic confirmation came from a different IP address, one linked to a residential connection. She paused, then said the address matched my parents' home. On top of that, the digital signature timestamp showed it was created in the middle of the night, hours after I had gone to sleep. I thanked her and hung up, sitting alone with information that felt heavier than the money itself. This wasn't just misuse. It wasn't a misunderstanding. Someone had actively impersonated me. Someone had decided my consent was optional. In that moment, the story shifted from family conflict to something far more serious. I confronted my father again, this time with facts instead of questions. I told him I knew where the authorization came from. I told him I knew when it happened. There was silence on the line, longer than before. When he finally spoke, his voice was colder. He told me I was overreacting. He said I was ungrateful. He reminded me of everything he had done for me growing up, every expense, every sacrifice. He framed the theft as repayment, as if parenting were a loan I had unknowingly agreed to repay with interest. I told him he had 48 hours to return every dollar. I told him if he didn't, I would report the fraud. He exploded. He accused me of tearing the family apart. He said I would ruin his reputation. He said no one would take my side once they heard his version. That was when I realized he was less afraid of the law than he was of exposure. My mother called after that. She cried. She begged. She told me to think about consequences, not for me but for them. She asked how I could do this to my own parents. I asked her how they could do it to me. She didn't answer. Share this video so communities understand what was hiding behind the phrase, family helps family. Because silence is how this kind of harm survives. That night, I filed the report. It felt surreal typing out my own father's name in a fraud complaint. I expected to feel guilt. What I felt instead was relief. For the first time since opening that app, I wasn't frozen. I was moving forward. The investigation moved faster than I expected. Within days, an officer from the Financial Crimes Unit called to ask clarifying questions. She spoke in precise language, neutral and calm, the kind of voice that doesn't judge but doesn't soften facts either. She explained that unauthorized digital signatures, even on joint accounts, crossed a legal line, especially when evidence showed deliberate impersonation. Hearing it framed that way stripped the situation of emotion. It wasn't about respect or gratitude or family hierarchy. It was about consent and fraud. Word traveled through my family almost immediately. My brother texted me first, asking what I had done. Not why, not how I was coping, just what I had done. When I told him the truth, he accused me of overreacting. He said Dad was only trying to help him. I asked if he knew where the money came from. He didn't answer that question either. Instead, he told me I was selfish. That label followed me for days, echoed by aunts and uncles who suddenly felt entitled to weigh in on my life. My father called from an unfamiliar number after I blocked his usual one. His voice was controlled but tight. He said the police visit had been humiliating. He said neighbors were asking questions. He said I had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I listened quietly, then told him he had crossed it first when he decided my savings were his to take. He hung up without responding. I spent those days oscillating between doubt and certainty. Late at night, I wondered if I should have handled things differently. In the morning, I reviewed the evidence again and felt grounded. Facts don't change based on guilt. The bank confirmed the findings. The transfer was officially labeled fraudulent. Recovery proceedings began. Then came the day everything collided. It was a weekend afternoon when the police went to my parents' house. I wasn't there, but my phone started vibrating nonstop. Messages, calls, panic. Someone said officers were at the door. Someone else said my dad was being questioned. Another relative warned me that this would never be forgiven. If this shocked you, comment truth below, because what happened next didn't just change my finances. It changed how everyone saw my family. By the time things settled, the narrative my father relied on had cracked. Documents spoke louder than reputation. My savings were scheduled to be returned. My father was facing charges. And the family that once told me loyalty was everything suddenly went very quiet. The return of the money didn't feel like victory. When the deposit notification finally appeared in my account, the number looked familiar but distant, like seeing an old photo of yourself after something fundamental has changed. The bank required me to open a new account in my name only. No shared access. No exceptions. Signing those forms felt more final than the police report ever did. It was the quiet end of a version of myself who believed access was the same thing as love. The fallout spread slowly, then all at once. My brother lost the sympathy he'd been counting on. People started asking where the emergency had really been, why the money needed to be moved in secret, why the signature had been forged instead of discussed. He stopped returning calls. My mother withdrew from everyone. She told friends she was tired, overwhelmed, misunderstood. None of them pressed. Silence became the family's new language. I went to work every day like nothing had happened, but inside I was rebuilding from the ground up. I booked therapy sessions. I learned the difference between guilt and responsibility. I stopped explaining myself to people who had already decided I was wrong. The more distance I put between myself and the chaos, the clearer everything became. My father didn't lose control. He exercised it. He assumed I would absorb the damage quietly, the way I always had. Months later, the legal process wrapped up. He accepted a plea deal. Probation, restitution, community service. Watching from a distance, I felt no satisfaction, just closure. Accountability didn't erase the hurt, but it put it where it belonged, not on me. The biggest change wasn't financial. It was internal. I stopped confusing endurance with strength. I stopped measuring my worth by how much I could give away. When I finally started house hunting again, it wasn't with desperation. It was with patience. When I found a place that felt right, I signed the papers alone. My name, my choice, my future. If this story made you pause, here's what I'll leave you with. Hit like if you believe truth matters even when it's uncomfortable. Comment and tell me where you would have drawn the line. And subscribe if you want more stories about choosing self-respect over silence, because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop protecting the people who never protected you. After everything settled, people assumed the story was over. Money returned. Case closed. Lesson learned. But that's not how it works when the betrayal comes from inside your own family. The real aftermath wasn't loud. It was quiet and disorienting. It showed up in moments I didn't expect. At the grocery store, reaching for something expensive and instinctively putting it back. At night, waking up from dreams where I was explaining myself to rooms full of people who wouldn't listen. Even with the facts on my side, a part of me still felt like I had broken some unspoken rule. Family gatherings disappeared from my calendar without anyone saying it out loud. No invitations, no check-ins, just distance. I learned who had been tolerating me and who had actually cared. That knowledge stung, but it was also clarifying. I stopped chasing explanations. I stopped defending myself in imaginary arguments. Silence became my boundary. My father never apologized. Not really. There were messages relayed through my mother, phrases like, he regrets how things played out, and he never thought it would go this far. None of them included the words I'm sorry or I was wrong. That told me everything. Accountability had been forced on him by law, not by conscience. And I understood then that closure doesn't always come with understanding. What surprised me most was how many people quietly reached out after hearing pieces of what happened. Coworkers, old friends, even strangers who heard through mutual connections. They told me their own versions. Parents who opened credit cards in their names. Siblings who drained accounts temporarily. Relatives who treated success like shared property. I realized my story wasn't rare. It was just rarely confronted. That realization changed the way I saw my past. I wasn't unlucky. I was conditioned, taught to equate love with access, obedience with loyalty, silence with maturity. Walking away from that mindset felt like learning a new language in adulthood. Awkward at first, necessary always. I started building a life that didn't require approval. Small things at first, saying no without explanation, making decisions without running them by anyone, letting discomfort exist without rushing to fix it. Over time, those small acts stacked into something solid. Confidence rooted in choice, not endurance. By the time I moved into my new home, the anger had softened into something steadier. Clarity. I planted a garden in the backyard, not because it was symbolic, but because I wanted to. Every morning, watering it reminded me that growth responds to care, not obligation. That tending your own life is not selfish. It's essential. I don't know if my family will ever fully understand what they lost when they decided my boundaries were negotiable. I've stopped needing them to. My life is quieter now, but it's honest. And that honesty cost me less than silence ever did. There's a strange peace that comes after you stop waiting for people to change. I didn't notice it right away. It crept in slowly, replacing the constant background noise of tension I'd lived with for years. I no longer checked my phone with a knot in my stomach. I no longer rehearsed conversations in my head before they happened. The absence of chaos felt unfamiliar, almost empty at first, but then it started to feel like freedom. Holidays were the hardest adjustment. The first one I spent alone, I kept expecting sadness to hit me like a wave. Instead, what I felt was quiet. I cooked a small meal, ate when I was hungry, rested when I was tired. No emotional negotiations, no forced smiles. I realized how much energy I had been spending managing other people's feelings at the expense of my own. Letting that go felt like setting down a weight I didn't know I was carrying. Occasionally, guilt tried to resurface. It sounded like my mother's voice, reminding me of obligation, like my father's certainty, insisting he knew best. But guilt without wrongdoing has no place to stay. I reminded myself of the facts, of the forged signature, of the secrecy, of the choices they made when they thought I would stay quiet. Facts are anchors. They kept me from drifting back into doubt. I focused on building routines that belonged only to me, morning walks, cooking meals I actually enjoyed, planning for the future without fear that it could be taken away overnight. I learned to trust myself again, and that was the hardest part. Not trusting them less, but trusting me more. One afternoon, while sorting through old paperwork, I found the original notebook where I used to track my savings goals. Pages filled with careful handwriting, dates, small celebratory notes when I hit milestones. Instead of feeling sad, I felt proud. Not just because I rebuilt what was taken, but because I protected it. Because I didn't let fear or tradition override my right to safety. I realized something important then. The moment my father took that money, he didn't just drain my account. He tested whether I believed my life belonged to me. Reporting him was my answer. And even though it cost me relationships I once thought were permanent, it gave me something stronger in return: ownership of my own story. The police showing up at their door wasn't about revenge. It was about consequence. About drawing a line that said love does not include entitlement. Family does not mean access. And trust, once broken, doesn't get repaired by pretending nothing happened. I don't share this story because I enjoy revisiting it. I share it because someone watching needs to hear that it's okay to choose yourself, that protecting your future doesn't make you cruel. It makes you responsible. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is let the truth speak, even when it shakes the foundation you were taught to stand on. In the months that followed, I learned something no spreadsheet ever taught me. Security isn't just about numbers. It's about clarity, about knowing who has access to you, to your time, to your future. I changed my routines, my passwords, my expectations. I stopped answering calls that left me feeling smaller. I stopped explaining decisions that didn't require approval. Each small boundary felt awkward at first, like using a muscle that had been ignored for years, but it grew stronger with use. People still ask if I regret involving the police. They lower their voices when they ask, as if the question itself is dangerous. I answer honestly. I regret that it was necessary. I regret that someone I trusted put me in that position. But I do not regret choosing accountability over silence. Silence would have cost me far more than money. It would have cost me myself. My father and I no longer speak. That fact used to feel like a wound. Now it feels like information. Distance can be data too. It tells you where harm ends and healing begins. My mother sends occasional messages that never quite cross into responsibility. I don't respond, not out of spite, but out of self-respect. I've learned that closure doesn't always come from conversation. Sometimes it comes from consistency. What stays with me most is how quickly things changed once the truth became unavoidable. The same relatives who told me to stay quiet suddenly stopped calling. The same voices that demanded loyalty disappeared when loyalty required honesty. It hurt, but it also simplified my world. Fewer opinions, fewer expectations, more room to breathe. I think often about the version of me who opened that account years ago, who believed safeguards were unnecessary because love was enough. I don't judge her. She did the best she could with what she knew. But I protect who I am now with far more care. Trust is earned in actions, not titles. Family is defined by behavior, not blood. If you're watching this and recognizing pieces of your own life, I want you to hear this clearly. You are not wrong for wanting safety. You are not ungrateful for expecting consent. And you are not cruel for refusing to be used. Standing up for yourself doesn't erase love. It reveals whether it was real to begin with. Before we end, take a second to reflect. If someone you loved crossed this line, would you protect the relationship or your future? That question changed everything for me. If this story helped you feel less alone, hit like so others can find it too. Comment below and tell me what boundary you've been afraid to set. And subscribe for more real stories about truth, accountability, and choosing yourself, because peace isn't something you're given. It's something you claim.